Good afternoon, this is Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service with Alaska Weather. For May 12th, 2020, we have a couple of options for you. A 1-800 number that you can get in there and get through a menu system and get to your area of concern. There's also a webpage, weather.gov/Alaska, and you can take off Alaska and put in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage. That will again help you further refine your search. Lastly, we provide you with an email that you can get a hold of us if you have any questions or would like to ask us anything about the weather service. For the hazardous weather map, a lot of this is having to do with flooding, but we'll start up north. We do have a winter weather advisory out for the Arctic coast there, Prudhoe Bay, Kaktovia area. They do have some low clouds, fog, and a little bit of snow shower and winds being the main problem up there, up to 50 miles per hour. This advisory goes out until this evening, so please monitor the hazardous weather conditions at weather.gov/Alaska for your latest watches and warnings. We also have a bunch of advisories, watches out for snowmelt flooding. For the lower Koyukuk and middle Yukon valleys, they have snowmelt flooding, a little bit of minor flooding there in Allakaket until 12:45 p.m. This advisory goes out till Thursday afternoon. And again, it's for the Koyukuk and middle Yukon River area. Lastly, we also have a flood advisory out for the Chena upstream of the Moose Creek Dam. They have reports of water over the roads of Chena Hot Springs Road, mile marker 37, and that's causing some minor flooding there as well. Also in the middle Tanana Valley, we have Chattanooga, and that is in effect until May 12th at 5:30 p.m. A flood watch is out for that area. And again, this is for snowmelt flooding, causing high water and minor flooding. We also have the Good Pasture rivers also in this flood watch, and this is again through Wednesday evening. The watch is in effect for Wednesday evening for the Good Pasture River. Snowmelt flooding again is the problem, and there's flooding is possible along the upper reaches, with flooding possible along the lower reaches tonight and Tuesday. We also have flood watch in effect for the upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country. Again, this is for snowmelt as well, and this could be flooding low-lying areas in the 40-mile basin. We also have a flood advisory that did not show up on the map for the Dietrich River north of Wiseman on the highway there, so be watchful of that. And lastly, we also have a flood advisory for the Salcha, and again, that's for snowmelt. Flooding is occurring along the upper reaches of the Salcha River, with flooding expecting along the lower reaches of the Salcha River on Monday, and that is for out until 5:30 p.m. today. Again, lastly, please go to weather.gov/Alaska for the latest in these watches and warnings and advisories. So what's going on in the breakup map? We did have, looks like the only area of concern left for right now is the Koyukuk River. There's some snowmelt issues going on there, and that's where we had a flood advisory out for that area. We're now concentrating on the Kobuk and Noatak rivers, and then we're going to be focusing in on the North Slope rivers as the snowmelt process continues and the breakup process continues as well. but otherwise open conditions along all of the Yukon until you hit Fort Yukon, and then we hit mostly open conditions from there on down. Lastly, we are watching the lower end of the Yukon with some ice there, mostly ice conditions down at the lower end of the Yukon. Otherwise, southern mainland is either open or mostly open at this point. Looking at the surface map, you can see some clouds and precipitation associated with a low in between, somewhere between Shimmy and Adak in there. We'll see that on the surface map, but we did report some rain showers and a little bit of, again, with that winter weather advisory along the Arctic coast. We have some snow and blowing snow up that way, but otherwise some clouds in the southwest associated with a weak low there in a trough moving towards the west into the Bering Sea. As you can see, as we set this in motion, again, very nice weather across much of the Panhandle and into southeast interior and down across south central Alaska. Maybe a little bit of shower activity there in Kodiak and the northern part of the Alaska Peninsula, but otherwise you can see that large low moving eastward there in the Aleutians. What does this look like on the surface map? A 979 millibar low there in the eastern or central Aleutians with a occluder front, precipitation out along that frontal boundary. Otherwise a 1015 millibar high in the western Gulf of Alaska, scattered snow showers in the southwest around that weak low as it heads westward, weak trough associated with that system. Again, there's that fog and snow showers along the Arctic coast and very nice conditions there in the Panhandle. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at, again, that low moving eastward from the central Aleutians, 985 millibar low now, with again troughs rotating around that system, weak rain across much of the Aleutians and into the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise a 1010 millibar high in the Gulf, weak trough out across south central and down through the Panhandle. And then we have again that weak low moving westward with snow showers, mixed precipitation associated with that low pressure system. Wednesday's weather, again, that low just now south of the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, 988 millibar low now. And again, that weak trough, low pressure system, 10,009 millibar low now in the central Bering Sea, trough associated with that producing mixed precipitation. Otherwise, over south central Alaska, a thermal low analyzes a 10,000 or 1,003 millibar low with troughs associated with that system, rain showers in the southeast interior down through the Yukon territory, and then lastly a low in just south of Panhandle. For Thursday's weather, again that weak low continued moving westward, 1,009 millibar low, trough, mixed precipitation associated with that system. And there's that low south of the Alaska Peninsula now, 988 millibar low. A few rain showers associated with that system, otherwise thermal low in southwest Alaska now with a trough extending from that low, creating weak rain showers across south central and down through the Panhandle around a 1016 millibar high. Low temperatures Wednesday morning, we're looking at teens across the North Slope, 20 there in Point Lay, Point Hope 31, Kotzebue 34, 32 in Fort Yukon, 29 in Eagle, 30s and even low 40s across the midsection of the mainland, down through the southwest, Bethel 38 and Aniak 38, McGrath 40, and then King Salmon 36 and 30s and low 40s across the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, and then 40s across the Panhandle, 40 at Kodiak Island. High temperatures Wednesday afternoon, 20s across the North Slope, 38 now Point Hope, 54 in Fort Yukon, 52 in Eagle, 60s, low 60s, upper 50s across much of the midsection of the state, 61 in Bethel, 58 in Antioch, 59 in McGrath. And then Galena 61 in Anchorage as well. Talkeetna 67, 70 there in the Copper River Basin, 54 in Kodiak, 40s and maybe even a 50 there along the Alaska Peninsula down through the Aleutians, 60s in the Panhandle, 58 there in Yakutat. And then for Thursday morning, we're going to be looking at teens across the North Slope again. Point Hope 23, 29 in Kotzebue, 27 in Fort Yukon, 23 in Adigan Pass, Eagle 18. And then as we move into the midsection of the state, 34 there in Fairbanks, 32 in Northway, 40 in Antioch, 36 in McGrath, 40 in Bethel, and then Nome with 36, and then 43 there in Anchorage for overnight lows, 43 in Kodiak, 40 in King Salmon, and then 40s and upper 30s through the rest of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, mid 40s through much of the Panhandle, 43 in Yakutat, and 43 in Cordova. For high temperatures Thursday afternoon, we're looking at 20s across the North Slope again, Adigan 41, Anaktuvuk 34, 54 in Fort Yukon, 52 in Eagle, 47 in Kotzebue, Point Lay 27, Point Hope 38, Nome 47, 60s across much of the midsection, 58 in Fairbanks, 61 in Cantwell and McGrath 59, 58 in Antioch, 61 in Bethel, and then 59 in King Salmon, 40s across much of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, St. Paul 45, and 54 in Kodiak, Yakutat 58, 60s across much of the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Afternoon, let's take a look at the flying weather for Wednesday morning. IFR conditions across much of the Bering Sea associated with a low moving westward through that region. Otherwise, IFR conditions across the north side of the, and portions of the north side of the Brooks Range. Otherwise, around a low pressure system there, just south of the Aleutians, IFR conditions will show up there. And also IFR conditions across much of the Alaska Peninsula, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, and southern end of the Kodiak Island. For Wednesday afternoon, looking at continued IFR conditions, again associated with that low moving westward through the Bering Sea. IFR conditions spread out through much of the central and central Bering Sea. Otherwise, marginal conditions showing up across the Aleutians. And again, IFR conditions on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, very nice flying conditions across much of the mainland and into southeast. For Thursday, IFR conditions along the North Slope, with the next trough moving around the high pressure area in the Arctic region. Otherwise, IFR conditions again continues through much of the Bering Sea, and a weak trough moving through the Panhandle brings IFR conditions Thursday morning. And for Thursday afternoon, marginal conditions along the North Slope and marginal conditions through much of the southern Bering and Aleutians, with areas of IFR in the central Bering Sea and marginal conditions through the Panhandle and into the North Gulf. Past conditions, Anaktuvuk marginal, Adigan marginal, improving to VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill get VFR conditions for Wednesday. Rainy, marginal early, VFR by the end of the day. And Wenday marginal, improving to VFR. Isabel marginal, improving to VFR. Mentasta VFR. Tanita marginal, improving to VFR conditions. And Portage VFR. And once again, very nice flying weather continues across Chilkoot and White Passes for Wednesday. Looking at the freezing levels, a chaotic chart for Wednesday morning. Surface freezing level comes across the Bering and in through and meanders through the mainland, with 10,000 foot elevation there in the Chukchi Sea area. Otherwise, 12,000 foot shows up over the Panhandle and through much of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, to 4,000 foot freezing levels down that way. For icing on Wednesday, isolated moderate across portions of the western mainland and down through the Alaska Peninsula between 8 and 10,000 feet there. Also in isolated areas, considerable moderate across the central Aleutians and portions of the southwest and south side of the Seward Peninsula. Jet stream for Wednesday, around the low pressure just south of Aleutians, 160 knots there, 35 knots as you get into the central Aleutians, 35 knots as well as you get towards the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, 55 knots coming through the Kenai Peninsula and in through the central mainland. You get into 45 knots there, out through the Kotzebue Sound area under easterly winds, 50 knots there, and finally across the North Slope, 70 knots touching the Arctic coast. For 9,000 foot Wednesday, 25 knots across the Arctic coast there, 30 knots as you get into the Chukchi Sea region, and 25 to 40 knots across much of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And again, around that low pressure system, 70 knots there at 9,000 feet on the south side of the Aleutians. And for 3,000 foot winds, Wednesday, 35 knots there touching the Arctic coast, 25 knots in portions of the central and eastern Brooks Range, and 25 to 45 across portions of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians around that low pressure system. And again, a 55 knot speed maximum on the south side of the Aleutians. Otherwise, across much of the mainland, light and variable conditions at 3,000 feet. For turbulence, below 3,000 feet across portions of the north side of the Brooks Range and the south side of the Brooks Range as well, with isolated moderate and maybe some areas considerable moderate, and also down there across much of the Aleutians below 3,000 feet.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. It's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
It's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Good afternoon. Let's take a look at the sea ice analysis by our sea ice desk here in Anchorage. We do have lower concentrations of ice just off the YK Delta. Otherwise, shorefast ice was anchored in Norton Sound and portions of Koskobee Sound. Also lower concentrations of ice around St. Lawrence Island. For Wednesday's marine forecast for southeast, winds generally from a southeast at 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 3 feet in the inside waters. Again, outside waters, northern sections from the west 10 to 15, central and southern from the southerly direction 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. And for Thursday's marine southeast, winds generally from the southeast at 10 to 15 knots, outside waters much the same. Winds as high as 15 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. South Central Gulf area, winds generally from the west 15 to 20. Prince William Sound generally from the southwest at 10. Seas as high as 4 feet in the Gulf region. Cook Inlet 10 to 15 knots, seas as high as 4 feet as you get near the Barren Islands. And then for Thursday, Gulf area, winds generally from the east 15 to 20, seas as high as 5 feet. Prince William Sound from the east 15, seas as high as 2 feet. Cook Inlet, winds generally from the southerly direction in the southern and northern portions of the Cook Inlet up to 15 knots there, seas as high as 3 feet. Southern Cook Inlet, winds generally from the southeast to 20 knots, seas as high as 4 feet. Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the southwest 15 to 20, south side of the peninsula 15 to 20, seas as high as 6 feet. North side, winds generally from the east 10 to 15, seas as high as 3 feet. And for Thursday, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the east 20 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. South side of the peninsula, winds generally from the northeast at 20 knots, seas as high as 9 feet. North side of the peninsula, winds generally from the south or east up to 10 knots. Small craft advisories out probably for Wednesday's Aleutian Chain. Winds generally from the northeast at 20 to 30 knots, seas as high as 17 feet just south of Atka. And for Thursday, winds come down quite a bit. Winds generally from the north 10 to 15. From the west, for the west coast on Wednesday, winds generally from the east 10 to 20 knots across the region. And then for Thursday, winds generally from the north, 10 to 20. Winds generally from the southeast around the Pribilofs, seas as high as 4 feet there. And then for the Arctic coast, winds generally from the east, 20 to 25 in the Beaufort Sea. And then down through the northwest coast, winds generally from the north, 10 to 35 knots there. And then for Thursday, Arctic coast, Beaufort Sea region, winds continue out of the east, 15 to 20, northwest coast, just off of the northwest coast, winds generally from the northeast, 30 to 35, down through the Bering Strait, generally from the north and northeast, 20 to 25. For tonight's weather, looking at a 985 millibar low just south of the Aleutians with scattered rain showers through the Aleutians and into the southern Bering around the weak trough. And then with a low moving west across the northern Bering, scattered mixed precipitation associated with that system, otherwise a 1010 millibar high in the Gulf with a weak trough through south central and into the Panhandle, fog and blowing snow across the Arctic coast. And then for Wednesday's forecast, that low in the northern Bering moves slightly westward, 1009 millibar low, mixed precipitation associated with that system. And the system just south of the Aleutians now 988 millibar low, just south of the Aleutians, and thermal trough over the south central 1003 millibars with weak troughs around that system. Maybe a few rain showers in the southeast interior, otherwise continuing nice weather across the Panhandle. And for Thursday, again, that low continues to move west, 1009 millibar low in the western Bering, and then that weak low moves over towards southwest in the Bristol Bay region, troughs associated with that system down through south central and into the British Columbia.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.